Welcome to season 3, episode 1 of Future of Apprenticeships. This is a collaboration between FE News and NCFE, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's episode is Are Apprenticeships Still Working for 16 to 19-year-olds? My name is Gavin O'Meara. I'm the CEO and founder of FE News, and thanks so much for joining us today. We've got a really epic lineup of guests today. So often we talk about our apprenticeships still relevant and valid for apprentices, and we often forget to invite apprentices into the conversation. Today we're not doing that, and also we've got someone who I know very, very well and has got a massive heart for youth employment, but also for apprenticeships as well, and also works at the largest employer in the UK with Lucy Hunte from NHS. But I thought it's a really good idea to maybe set the scene a little bit. Interesting timing for us is that we had a final part of a 3-part series from IFS last week, and it was actually the most popular exclusive article of the week. So brilliant timing, because it was all about what happened to youth apprenticeships. And what was interesting is some of the stats that they got on here. So if you don't mind me reading this out a bit to you, 50 years ago, 1 in 3 teenage boys entered apprenticeships on leaving school, mainly onto manual trades. And also 50 years ago, the ladies that joined from leaving school went into things like hairdressing and stuff like that. Obviously, the world has moved on since then. But interestingly, fast forward to the present day, less than 1 in 20 young people between the ages of 16 to 18 are apprentices, according to IFS. And more than half of all apprenticeships are for people that are 25 plus. That's a very interesting change in stat. Also throwing in another sort of a little bit of data, so we underpin this with data, is that IPPR and London Progression Collaboration launched a bit of research in National Apprenticeship Week, very, very interesting last year. And the 72% fall in entry-level apprenticeships was seen since 2014. That's massive drop. And the biggest decline in apprenticeships, really interesting, was in London. So under 19s were down from 9,550 in 2016-17 to 3,880 in 2021. That's just 11% of apprenticeship starts, and half of what they were 5 years ago, which is also a really, really interesting stat. So I just want to underpin that to set the scene, really. Now, it isn't just me that's going to be hosting this. I've got a really great co-host in Suzanne Slater, who's actually Director of Operations and Apprenticeships at NCFE. Suzanne, I wonder if you could join us in the studio. Hey, Suzanne, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Morning,
how
everyone.
Morning,
really
and thanks
good,
everyone
thanks.
for joining us. One thing
Absolutely.
I didn't say, we're live. This isn't like a pre-record or anything like that. I know that we had a real massive uptake in people on different social media platforms that were joining from not just in the apprenticeship world, from all areas of youth employment and looking at areas of apprenticeships and skills. So you are more than welcome to comment. Please keep them short, because otherwise it goes across our faces and it gets a bit freaky if you decide of the studio. That please feel free to get involved, and not at the 28-minute mark, please. That always gets difficult to wrap it up. So Suzanne, why do you think we've seen such a decrease in entry-level apprenticeship starts for 16 to 19-year-olds?
Well, to be honest, I think there's a number of different factors, and I think firstly, I think we need to consider the sort of significant change that we've seen in how apprenticeships are funded, especially since the introduction of the levy in 2017. And, employers are very much in the driving seat now. They are absolutely deciding how their levy is spent. And I think looking at the data, the levy supported around 2/3 of apprenticeship starts in 21-22. So obviously, they're having a big impact, those levy payers. But I think alongside that, we've also seen, since the introduction of the levy and apprenticeship reform, we've seen a significant increase in the number of higher level apprenticeships. Which is absolutely fantastic, is it, offers a sustained progression route for learners, and also enables learners who don't wish to follow the traditional kind of HE route, it offers them an alternative pathway. However, I think these two factors have really contributed to the kind of sustained rise in the average age of an apprentice.
Definitely.
And I think levy payers are predominantly using their apprenticeship funding to upskill existing staff and recruit more experienced candidates, when they have new opportunities. So I think that's definitely one factor, that change in the funding, which has really had a huge impact.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad you mentioned that because what's interesting as well. So anyone that I've said that there was a different range of audience out there. So if you've come across the levy before, apprenticeship levy, like Suzanne said, it was 2017 it come into play, but it's for large employers, 3 million payroll plus 0.5% goes into a pot, which is meant to be used for upskilling the apprentices. First of all, for them, they can transfer. Interestingly, there's been a massive what's called a clawback. It's use it or lose it, isn't it, Suzanne? So
It is, yeah.
And this isn't news either. Like 2020, my mate is wrote a really, really, really nice article around looking at Richard Marsh did a piece around looking at levy clawback from 2020. It was January 2020 from memory, and that was £2 billion. Now that's £3.3 billion. That's a huge amount of money that's going back to Treasury. They're probably like, yay. But what does that mean for for young people? And I think it's really cool that we've got an interesting range of guests because we've got an actual apprentice, and to let everyone know as well, there's 3 apprentices in the background that are making this live stream happen as well. So we're actually really getting the apprentices involved in this, and we've got the largest employer in the UK. So I wonder if we could bring them in actually, and then start to get them started to be able to then talk about their own experiences, but also some solutions for the way forward. So we've got John-Joe Tams, who is an accreditation apprentice at NCFE, and we've got Lucy Hunte, who's National Programme Manager for Apprenticeships at NHS. So John-Joe and Lucy, I wonder if I could bring you both in to the studio. Hey, John-Joe. Hey, Lucy, how are you?
Hi, everyone.
So Suzanne, I know you wanted to sort of kick things off with John-Joe, because it's always so often the apprentice voice in this conversation isn't there, which is always weird to me. So it'd be really good to get John-Joe involved.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's fantastic, I think, to hear from an actual apprentice. So John-Joe, can you just tell us why your experience sort of so far with regards to your apprenticeship has kind of been a good pathway for you?
To be honest, starting the apprenticeship for me, although I might not have realised it at the time, it's probably the best thing that I ever did, because ever since I did join my apprenticeship, my eyes have been really opened as to all the opportunities out there. Like even coming on here today, I've been able to get involved in some amazing opportunities and meet some really interesting people. I've had access to some extremely intelligent people who work within NCFE, who have been able to guide us and sort of mold us into a young professional from being just a young kid who left school and didn't really know what they wanted to do with herself. So I think the apprenticeship is the best thing that I ever did, because it's gave us so many professional skills. It's also gave us an opportunity to continue learning academically, but at the same time, it's gave us a lot of skills even within me personal life. Me confidence has improved massively. In other skills, sort of independence, and you start earning money, so you become a lot more independent and a lot more adult, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very, very much. John-Joe, you mentioned, just before we joined, around, you talked to a couple of your peers. So around, you mentioned really 2 interesting points: jobs for survival, jobs for progression. Did you want to sort of explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so ahead of coming on here today, I spoke to a lot of young people around my age. I'm 20, so between sort of 18 to 25 kind of is the age bracket of the majority of people that I kind of associate with. And a lot of people have said things to me like they don't want to necessarily invest the time into joining an apprenticeship and into completing that apprenticeship, because there's jobs out there for people our age that are more survival based. So they're jobs where there isn't necessarily a lot of pathway for progression, but for somebody our age, it would be good money. So a lot of people want to take them jobs, especially within the current sort of economic situation, with the energy crisis and fuel crisis and stuff. There's a lot of young adults and young people just choosing to take up the jobs for survival rather than invest in the future and actually join an apprenticeship and then work through that and see what progression pathways are open to them at the end of that within either a large organization or within a specific profession. But there's, like I say, they're not really as interested in that. And I think a large factor in that is to do with money.
Yeah,
it's really interesting, isn't it? I think, like you said, what was different for you then, John-Joe? What kind of made you take a different view on things and, you know, kind of take a different pathway?
To be honest, I think I was just extremely lucky, because when I left school during the pandemic, I was 18 and I was studying my A levels, so I left with predicted grades. And I didn't really know what to do with myself because I'd left school on such short notice. But luckily for me, my dad's self-employed, so he was able to sort of take us in with him and just show us the ropes a bit. Like I wasn't doing a lot, but I was learning how to do something at least. And I was able to occupy myself while I was looking for an apprenticeship. And I did want to have an apprenticeship when I left school. That was like my original plan. But I guess the point that I really stress is that I'm lucky enough that I was a little bit too young or in a little bit of a too fortunate position to have any financial worries. Whereas now I think the majority of people I speak to, as times have moved on, we've all got a little bit older and we all have responsibilities and all things depending on us. So some of us do actually have these financial worries now, and that is what's stopping them from getting an apprenticeship. Whereas for me, at the time I was searching for an apprenticeship, I didn't have any financial responsibilities or any worries at all with that. So I was able to sort of just relax and take as long as it needed. And it took about a year for me to find this apprenticeship that I'm in now.
that's really interesting, isn't it?
It is. And it was interesting you touched upon, obviously you made the decision that, you know, you wanted to start an apprenticeship. And is that something that was encouraged through your school? Because I know, you know, that there's been a lot of controversy around sort of young people and getting the right access to information, careers advice and guidance around, you know, apprenticeships and vocational education. And is that something that was promoted, you think, quite well within your school? Were you given that kind of broad kind of view of the different options available?
Within my school, at sixth form, every Thursday or so, we would have an assembly where someone would come in and they would talk to us about a different option, where people come in from universities, apprenticeships or employers, things like that. So although the support was there, I do think that it was massively tailored towards going to university, because everyone believes that university is the best option. And I think that is actually somewhat of a problem within schools, because 90% of my sort of prompting to do something after school was prompting me to go towards university. It wasn't that I felt maybe not clever enough to go to uni, because I did consider going to uni massively. And actually, I signed up to a summer school where it was a 3-day residential trip to Sunderland University. And it was a brilliant experience, but I just thought that uni wasn't for me. When I was back in school, I wasn't, like I said, I touched on before a little bit, I wasn't so confident. So I wasn't really wanting to kind of make that commitment to going to university. And so I didn't actually fill out a UCAS form at all or anything. I just knew I wanted to go and get an apprenticeship. And I wanted to kind of become more independent that way. And there was some teachers who would say like why? Like, if you get good grades, you should go to uni. So I think the point that I really want to stress is that even if you get good grades, uni isn't always the pathway for you. It just wasn't suited to me at all. I didn't like it, to be honest. I didn't really like having the thought of having to live with other people was a massive thing that put me off, to be honest. I was a bit of a hermit, you know, so I wanted to keep myself to myself and just become more independent that way. So I think we do need to stress a lot more that apprenticeships are a valid option, and they're a very successful option for people who are intelligent and do want to apply themselves as much as they can towards an apprenticeship. You can actually achieve massive amounts over the course of an apprenticeship that I really wasn't aware of at all until I already started this apprenticeship, which means that if I was sold enough to sign up to an apprenticeship, knowing so little, if I knew everything that I do now about apprenticeships, I would have massively encouraged anybody to go into that route.
Yeah, no, definitely. Lucy, you've been sitting there and listening away, and I know you've probably come across that what John-Joe said and heard it many times. I know when you did your level 7, you did a little bit of research around influences for apprentices. I don't know if you wanted to share that, because I thought it was really interesting. We talked about it earlier.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I did a piece of research for my ILM level 7 into the barriers into apprenticeships for young people, and I was focusing on those from underserved communities. But a lot of what John-Joe said, really resonates with me. And as a mother of a 15-year-old, I'm actually going through this as well, because her school, apprenticeships are not even mentioned. She's being told Oxbridge, she's being told, that she can go to university, she's predicted 9s, but she's like, but I want to do an apprenticeship. And her teacher actually gasped and said, no, you're far too clever for that. So that just kind of shows the lack of understanding. Luckily, she's got me at home in her ear. But, I think the key things that came out in my research were that lack of impartial careers advice and guidance. And I do understand that while schools are competing to keep them from A levels, are they really truly going to say, here's the big wide world out there, you can leave us and go and do these things? And I don't think that's the case. And I'm experiencing that with my daughter. Lack of support around applications. You have designated time in school to do your UCAS applications. Does anyone get that for apprenticeships? Not that I've ever heard of. And a really interesting piece that came out was the biggest blockers were parents and schools, as I mentioned, but parents, and particularly for those from a BAME background, it's that parity of esteem. They really just didn't understand the benefits of an apprenticeship. I met an amazing apprentice called Destiny from Essentia recently, and she told me she had to do a PowerPoint presentation to her parents to show the cost benefits of doing a degree apprenticeship over the traditional route. And when they realised, that she was going to have a salary, she was, guaranteed a job, they weren't going to have to be supporting her maintenance grants or anything like that. It was a game changer, but it just shows that actual lack of understanding is still out there. I'm in the NHS. I've been doing this job for 6 years. Prior to that, I worked in colleges. I still get people saying, oh, I didn't know the NHS did apprenticeships. They still think, as you mentioned earlier, it's the trades, it's hairdressing. They don't understand that we've got pathways now from level 2 up to level 7, and that the opportunities they can offer. But yeah, and I think also we need more young ambassadors like John-Joe actually going out and waving the flag, because he's so eloquent and clearly passionate. And there's still that perception around young people and what they can bring to organizations. And I think big part of what came out of my research as well was a lot around employer expectations. If you are advertising for an entry level 2 role, why are you asking for A levels? It just doesn't make sense. And also the whole point of an apprenticeship is to teach, if they come with the right attitude, you teach them the skills and the knowledge. They should have the behaviors. But again, looking at some of the job specs when I was doing that research, they were asking for a fully qualified person to come in and do a level 2 role. So there's still a massive disconnect in that. And also something that's coming out as well is now this huge competition for degree apprenticeships. We've been doing some work with UCAS, and I've got examples where people had offers from Russell Group universities, declined them to go and do a degree apprenticeship, which is great, and I totally understand that. But in terms of supporting widening participation and social mobility, that is a frustration now, that actually these kids that are getting supported with their applications in their academies and have access to all of this careers advice are now going to be potentially elbowing people that really need that step up. And we've talked about leveling up, but I really think that's a concern. We're launching the doctor apprenticeship, and that's going to be something that we're really passionate around, is making sure that we've got some clear WP metrics to ensure that we're aiming this at the people that we want to reach, and that is those that couldn't afford to do the traditional route, from more diverse backgrounds, from underserved communities. And so whether that's going to be free school meals, postcodes, first person to go to university in the family, we don't know yet, but I think we definitely need to be looking at those metrics now to make sure that the people that need these opportunities the most are not going to be left behind.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Lucy, can I ask you work for NHS. If anyone doesn't know, that's the largest employer in the UK. So that's really interesting to be able to get your perspective on this. Plus, you're passionate about apprenticeships, but all different routes as well. We haven't sort of touched on other things on around this, but we've got a focus on future apprenticeships. The levy created a business case for apprenticeships even more. So how do we sort of take that from your experience of being, business case around looking at also bringing in entry level apprentices and also the qualifications and the apprenticeships that are available as well. I didn't know if you wanted to share anything on that.
Yeah, so the levy for us in the NHS was a hugely positive thing. For once we had essentially this budget ring fenced for CPD, so we really have embraced it. We're actually on track to overspend our levy. We're now relying on external transfers from other sectors, so we're spending 220 million a year. So that just shows how well we're kind of embracing that. But again, it's that entry level talent pipeline. We've not got very many level 2 standards available now. Level 2 business admin. We've still got really passionate people in the Trailblazer group plugging away. If it truly is an employer-led system, then why are they not listening to the biggest employer in the country? I don't know, but as long as there's breath in my body, we will continue to fight for this. But yeah, it is a huge issue, and I think that's that lack of understanding around these level 2, level 3 roles. But also something that came out in my research was around rural coastal differences. So we've got some trusts that are quite rural and really wanted to attract young people into level 2 roles, and they weren't getting any applications. And then it was actually the apprenticeship lead in the organisation's daughter that pointed out, but she was like, but mum, how are they going to get there? And where the trust was out of the city centre, there was a bus, but it stopped running at 3 o'clock. So these apprentices, if they did get a job, could get there, but couldn't necessarily get home, and it literally was down winding roads with no light, with street lights. So there's lots of things that maybe when we are trying to recruit this young talent, we need to bear in mind. John-Joe talked about financial issues, and I've worked with a lot of young people in my time at the college where they were being told they couldn't take up the apprenticeship because it was going to affect their parents' benefits.
Yeah,
So
something that hasn't been touched on much at all. That is incredibly important.
Yeah, and it was breaking my heart. I had 16 to 18-year-olds being offered, this was when Crossrail was just starting, being offered fantastic level 3 engineering apprenticeships, paying 25 grand starting salary, coming back to me in tears saying, I can't do it, my mum and dad won't let me because it's going to affect their benefits. How are they going to break out of that cycle when you're turning down really well paid jobs with so many prospects? But I think that's going to be even more of an issue. We've got issues in terms of the cost of living crisis with our apprentices. If they're on clinical placements and they're having to travel around in community, the cost of the petrol, is more than their salary at the moment. There's lots of things that are coming into play. But yeah, I do think we need to do a lot more concerted work and looking at that talent pipelines. So, we're doing a lot more around virtual work experience, days in the life of, just trying to raise the perception of what a good, solid employer the NHS is. 350 different job roles. It's not just all clinical. If you like IT, finance, HR, there's a huge breadth of opportunities available. But I talk to any young person, even my own, they wouldn't even think of the NHS for any of those roles.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Just going back to what you said about the coastal communities and the rural community sort of trust that you was dealing with, what did they put in place then as sort of measures to be able to help the young people get into actually physically to and from the workplace?
So they were very clever. They took advantage of the government apprentice incentive, and they put on a shuttle bus. So from the town centre to the trust in time for work and to go home. So, it is possible, but they were for ages, saying, but we're not getting any applicants. We really want to attract young people. And it was something as physical as they physically couldn't get there. That was the issue. So, yeah, there are ways around it. But, I just thought that was a really interesting thing because they were, advertising these really exciting roles and not getting any candidates. And it took a young person to point out, but mum, unless you drive, they can't actually get there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I wonder if I could bring in as well someone from the audience. George has just put a comment in. I don't know if everyone can check this out at all. But George is saying that degrees still hold a high level status among many in the community, particularly within BAME groups. Like, so backing up what you're saying there, Lucy, and the stigma of apprenticeships are associated as trade jobs. Again, backing up exactly what you said. More market employer engagement and visibility needs to increase in secondary schools from year 7. So yeah, we totally agree with you.
100%. And I think that, that's what me and my team, we do. We volunteer with the Careers and Enterprise Company. By the time you go in year 10, 11, they've made up their minds. But I can really see the difference when I go into year 7 and I talk about the big range. You can see the light bulb moment and they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. But it's definitely, I agree with George, it's planting those seeds and making sure employers can get in front of young people and talk to them about what's available.
Yeah, no, 100%. let's bring in Suzanne back in. So I didn't know if we're getting. I said this was going to fly. We're at 28 minutes. It's literally flown. So Suzanne, I didn't know. Between us, we had another couple of questions that we wanted to sort of flesh out really, but I didn't know if you wanted to throw those out to John, Joe, and Lucy in one hit really, around sort of what personal experience, but also how do we then drive this forward? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it was to sort of. I know for yourself, John-Joe, with Lucy kind of touched on the business admin level 2, which I absolutely, completely agree with. I think we've lost a real kind of entry route for a lot of school leavers into employment through that apprenticeship not being available at the moment. But John, your experience obviously was you went straight in on a level 3. And how did you find that? Did you find there were gaps? Because I know some of the duties sometimes in the level 3 for a school leaver, or that there's certain duties that might take place, like leading a project or dealing with challenging or complex complaints. And sometimes for a school leaver that's quite challenging to achieve. Those sort of objectives. And I just wondered whether you felt a level 2 would have helped you and supported you more.
I think for me personally, I stayed on to do A levels at sixth form before I then left and decided to get an apprenticeship. So because my school offered BTEC in business studies, I already had my level 2 business studies and the level 3 business studies in the BTEC. So when I left school, I kind of had that year kind of off, as I say, before I started my apprenticeship, where I was kind of just doing whatever. And then when I started my apprenticeship, it was a level 3 business admin apprenticeship. So for me, the level of education, it wasn't too difficult. It was still enough to be challenging and enough to be interesting for me, because I just had a year off, so I was a little bit rusty in the beginning as well, not to forget. But I do seriously think if COVID had have happened, say, 6 months earlier than it did, and I would have only completed a year of the BTEC, I wouldn't have got to the end, because it was kind of luck of the draw that I was a bit ahead within the coursework. Because in literally, like, I don't know how familiar everyone is with sixth forms and stuff, but I might have arguably only been ahead of some of my peers because of like my independent study times being different to theirs and stuff like that. So it could literally be luck of the draw. And luckily I was a little bit ahead. But as I say, if COVID had have happened 6 months before, I would have only completed half of the level 3 business, and then maybe I would have needed a level 2. But typically, I do still believe there's a real market for the level 2 business admin apprenticeship amongst people leaving school at 16, because we've got a lot of children now, especially in this sort of, because we're struggling within the economy, there's a lot of young people thinking to themselves, well, I want to go out and earn money and I want to be successful immediately. And to some people, especially from working class areas in the northeast, to some people, success is money. So they will think straight away, like, I'm 16 years old, I've just finished my GCSEs, I'm going to move straight into an apprenticeship. And in those circumstances, maybe the level 3 is just a little bit too much or a little bit too stressful, because they do need to remember they will have like 20% of their working time to complete coursework, but the rest is really like getting into a job role, which can become quite difficult or quite demanding at times. So I do think amongst people straight leaving school at 16, I do think there's a real market there. Or even now that, as we say, people are typically older now who are signing on to apprenticeships, I think because they'll have missed out on education for a few years, there would still be a real market on the level 2, solely because people will be a little bit rusty because they haven't studied for a good few years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm going to bring in another comment from Emma. Yeah, look, John-Joe, that's really, really valid point around different communities and what is that value. I think so much needs to be changed around that, really, isn't there? Around success, around money, and also progression routes and stuff like that. Lucy, we're already over on time, so I'm really sorry to ask you to do a quick wrap up. And Emma, we're already over time, so I'm just trying to bring that in for you there. But I think it's really, really valid point.
I'd agree with Emma's comment, because I think even with my own daughter, she wants to go to university for the experience, and I
Yeah.
said, but you can get exactly the same degree and I won't have to pay. But yeah, I think that, you know, there's still a lack of understanding around that. But yeah, I mean, I just think John-Joe is a fantastic example of the caliber of young people that we can support through apprenticeships, and we need to kind of celebrate that and just raise awareness of the opportunities available.
Yeah, no, definitely. And a really quick one. I'm all over, so I'm sorry, everyone, but I wanted to ask Lucy this: like, how business case? Do you know what I mean? How can we help other employers understand the value of entry level apprenticeships for their business, and also to be able to help young people be able to come in? And if you give it in one line, that'd be amazing. But that's not too big a challenge, Lucy.
Well, look at your workforce needs. Look at your vacancies. You know, using facilities and estates as an example. In the NHS, the average age is 58. Yeah, but we're not attracting young people into those level 2, level 3 roles. That's a really solid career. That's a great example. So look at your vacancies. Where are the hot spots, cold spots, and develop apprenticeship routes to attract new talent.
Yeah, definitely. Jules jumped in again, and sorry, Jules, we're already over time, but I'm going to put that up just whilst I wrap up. And I think that's really interesting information as well. I said everyone would be jumping in about 28-minute mark, didn't I? So thanks everyone for joining us today. I think it's a really, really, really interesting episode that we had today, because we've been able to hear from apprentices, been able to hear from like large employers around what do we need to be able to help young people progress in their career, but also those barriers. Is it money? Is it parents? Is it careers advice and guidance? Is it quals that are actually available? And I think sometimes we also, this could go on forever, what we could unpack here. Also, there's a confusion over what quals there are with parents and employers as well, and I think that's something we haven't touched on. But I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. It was a really interesting episode, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Next week, we've got Future Apprenticeships and the focus on small business, 10 a.m. Thursday the 13th. Suzanne's going to be joining us in the hot seat with hosting that. And this is time I want to say a massive thank you. As I said, there's 3 apprentices, FE News side, that are running this in the background. So Finley, Holly, Danielle, thank you so much for putting this all together. Team NCFE. Got Sam, got Elliot and Lindsay. Couldn't have done it without you. So thank you so much for bringing this all together. We'll see you really soon, and see you next week. More comments coming in. George, thank you again for getting involved from the audience side as well. And we'll see you really, really soon. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it. John-Joe, thanks for giving it to us how it is for you. Lucy, thanks also for sharing what it's like a large employer basis, but also as a parent. And Suzanne, thank you so much for hosting it so wonderfully. Thanks so much, everyone. See you again next week. And thanks, Mark. And Mark.